not mistaken, happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Matt Lee has given me the best gift anyone could offer today.
Well, he actually tipped me off there. So
I see.
happy birthday on behalf of the board.
I appreciate it.
Could we start in Sudan?
Sure.
The deal that was reached this weekend with Prime Minister Hamdok being reinstated. I saw the Secretary's tweet yesterday. Wanted to pursue that to see how significant do you think this is? Is this a breakthrough? And some people on the street are saying that actually, effectively, the military is co-opting Prime Minister Hamdok. How do you see it? And then how does this relate to United States assistance? The U.S., of course, has suspended $700 million in economic assistance. Is that now, is there some talk about resuming that at this point, or is that premature?
Great. Let me say a couple things on that. First, we are encouraged. We are encouraged that the November 21st agreement is an important first step to put civilian-led democratic transition back on track. Specifically, we're encouraged by the release of Prime Minister Hamdok from house arrest and his reinstatement to office. But let me just underscore, this is a first step. This is nothing more than that, and we'll be watching very closely. And specifically, to build on this first step, we call on Sudanese leaders to implement the agreement and key transitional tasks. That includes creating a transitional legislative council, judicial structures, electoral institutions, and a constitutional convention. We urge the immediate release of all other civilian leaders and all those detained in connection with the military takeover, as is called for in this very agreement that was finalized on November 21st. We reiterate our call for the lifting of the state of emergency as well. Look, the resumption, the reinvigoration of Sudan's civilian transition remains a top priority for us. We have been very engaged on this, supporting that process, working very closely with the international communities. We'll continue to press on all of the relevant actors and stakeholders to work towards this goal and to ensure that the first step that was announced in recent hours is not the last step. To that end, I can relay that the Secretary had an opportunity today to speak to Prime Minister Hamdok, to speak to General Burhan, and that was essentially his message, that we must continue to see progress, we must continue to see Sudan move back down the democratic path, and that starts with the reinstitution of the Prime Minister, but it certainly doesn't end there.
And the U.S. assistance, is that still severed indefinitely?
Well, this goes to the first point, that this is a first step. It's not the last step. We'll be watching very closely. We don't have any announcements to make at this time regarding our assistance, any changes to our posture, but clearly those decisions will be predicated entirely on what happens in the coming hours, in the coming days, in the coming weeks.
So when you say first step, are you specifying like 4 or 5 steps before they can get the $700 million?
Look, what we are saying publicly, and obviously we are communicating with the parties as well, including the Secretary today. As you know, Molly Fee was in Khartoum last week now, where she had an opportunity to meet with Prime Minister Hamdok, where she had an opportunity to meet with military leaders, including General Burhan. But what we're making clear is that there's a ways to go before this process is fully back on track. We are invested in this process precisely because the Sudanese people are invested in their democracy, and the democracy that they worked so hard to achieve in the first instance, and now they are very clearly taking to the streets peacefully to make clear that their aspirations for democracy, for a constitutional government, they are undiminished. And so we continue to stand with the Sudanese people as together we support that goal of a reinvigorated democratic transition in Sudan.
Yeah, well, today there was a protester was killed, 14 others were injured, but that's not my question, because Mr. Hamdok said that the reason he's back is to maintain economic accomplishment, and there was an obvious reference in the aid that they are receiving from you, from others, and so on. So if he put that as a condition that you guys will restore this aid, I mean, you know, we're confused on the time frame. I know you're saying first step, but we don't know what the coming steps ought to be.
Well, we've talked about some of those steps, and I mentioned some of them in my opening comment. Again, to build on the first step that we've seen enacted, we call for these key transitional tasks to be completed. Creating a transitional legislative council, judicial structures, electoral institutions, and a constitutional convention. So we are encouraged by what we've seen so far, but this cannot, it must not, be the final step in what we see going forward.
Okay. Were there any reciprocal kind of assurances given to Mr. Burhan that you will stay where you are, you will stay in the position of leadership, and return, that he will allow the transitional process to take place? Was there any kind of quid pro quo with Mr. Burhan?
The Sudanese stakeholders, they have spoken to the contours of this agreement. Our only role in this was to support, to encourage productive negotiations to reinstate Prime Minister Hamdok. We didn't facilitate, we didn't mediate these discussions, but again, we were there as a supporting actor, supporting at our core the aspirations of the Sudanese people themselves. Yes.
On other issue.
Anything else on Sudan before we move on? Sorry. Sure.
Quickly, just to follow up on that, typically
On the issue of debt relief, that it's been cited as one of the concerns of this military takeover was that it was going to set them back in terms of receiving that debt relief as well as the aid. Does this deal change your view on that?
Well, again, this is a first step, and so we are still evaluating the best path forward to support Sudan's civilian-led transition in light of recent events. But what will contour our approach is what happens next, whether this first step is met with additional steps in the right direction, in furtherance of what the Sudanese people have so very clearly been calling for by peacefully taking to the streets and having their voices heard. Anything else on Sudan? Okay, great.